Hello and welcome to the Perpetual Traffic Podcast. This is your host, Ralph Burns, founder and CEO of Tier 11, not alongside my amazing co-host, Lauren E. Petrillo. She is on a beach somewhere again. No, actually, she's at a conference again, traveling. So in her place, not quite as good hair, I would say. Neither one of us, really, for that matter. Like the glowing blonde locks of Lauren E. Petrillo to guys that have receding hairlines or shaved heads. We have the replacement today, but not only replacement for Lauren, but somebody that we've been pumping up here quite a bit over the course of the last couple of months. I don't know if your ego is just blowing up sort of spontaneously from all the mentions on Perpetual Traffic, but
definitely inflated. Yes, definitely inflated ego right now. So, might have to just chunk me down a little bit.
Chunk it down a couple of notches. Yeah, well, I'm sort of the hype man here anyway, so I'm not really known for like chunking people down with a couple of notches. But anyway, if you already guessed the voice that has been on this show now 3 times, which I totally forgot the first 2, by the way, we have head of traffic at Tier 11, Nick Miller, the best guitar player I know, by the way, like puts everyone that I know to shame, because you were at one point in time like a professional guitar player. Like you got paid to play guitar and you are absolutely like, you are so lights out good. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, that was my life for a long time and got into marketing through music, believe it or not. It was a segue from music, and discovering the power of meta ads from promoting my band's music and my music, and thought, wow, I really like this. I want to maybe try it with some non-music businesses. And there we go. Fast forward. And then I discovered Perpetual Traffic as a long-time listener. This is first-time co-host, but third-time guest.
Yeah. I think the first time you were like out-talked by John Moran.
I got a few good nuggets in. I just waited and I got some good nuggets in where actually John was like, oh, I like that. So I'll take that as a win.
That's good. And back then he was Solutions 8. Now he's part of the Tier 11 team. It's like you're working together. You used to listen to this show. Now you're on the show. Like, this is very cool. So I would love to have you back on as a regular guest. But, I guess I am your boss technically, so I can say I need you on. But I really would like to have you on so we can bring more of these types of shows to the Perpetual Traffic audience, because we have been talking about you and your calculator, the nCAC calculator, for quite some time now. We've been giving it away, which, by the way, Nick is going to do a screen share today. So there's 2 URLs that you should make note of. First off, check us out over on our YouTube channel so you can see this actually happening, how we use the nCAC calculator. And if you don't know what nCAC is and you've been listening to this show, well, shame on you, because it's the nCAC, new cost to acquire a customer. It's everything. It's the most important metric for us, for our clients here at Tier 11, makes everything go around. The point is watch this over on our YouTube channel at perpetualtraffic.com/YouTube. Make sure you subscribe. And then, of course, you can get the calculator over at tier11.com/nCAC. So if that isn't enough buildup and enough big ego, I've called you brilliant media buyer, guitarist, the inventor of the nCAC calculator. I don't know. I got to work on my hype man skills, I guess. But tell us about the evolution of this thing, because we had been batting this around for a while, you and I, and then obviously with some of the other folks inside Tier 11. Talk to us about that just a bit.
Yeah, of course. And it's hard to believe a calculator could be something so exciting that it is. It's something that the reason
we're just nerds anyway, though, really.
Exactly.
It's okay.
But talking to the evolution, and the reason that it's exciting is that as we've gone through the shift, and this is coming from a recovering ROAS addict, and we know we have quite a lot of content talking about this, the evolution from ROAS. And
12-step program to get your ROAS.
Yeah. Maybe it's like 24 steps.
24 steps. Some of our clients still need to take it anyway.
I think we always knew that we're doing what we're doing to actually have an impact, positive impact on our clients' businesses. And look, for a long time, in-platform ROAS was a reliable way to measure that. But as the years progressed, we got omni-channel, there was a divergence, and ROAS became less and less of a reliable metric to use for building a business. So I think there's been enough content to cover that. So working with John, as you know, with you and just our overall strategy, what are the most reliable metrics that we can start focusing on to really have that clarity, have that confidence that we're using that paid media investment that we're entrusted with to create more profit for our customers, to really help them profitably scale. And probably the main leading indicator that you've mentioned was nCAC. So great. Okay, let's start focusing on that. Some clients, we ask them, what is the profitable number for you to acquire a customer? And some clients are like, well, it's $50 or it's $80. Other clients are like, oh, we have no idea. We think it's this. Okay, are you sure? And these clients, and again, coming from a recovering ROAS addict, these clients needed our help to work through their numbers to identify what this is. So we started building models. I started tinkering away. And the first prototype of the calculator we're about to share was way too complicated, was all on one sheet, you took a look at it, nowhere near as pretty as it is now. And I've got to actually give credit to our marketing and sales team for making this look much better than my version. But the functionality is still the same. That's the most important thing. And for another important point, this one here is primarily for e-commerce. So identifying nCAC, if you're selling digital products, it's very similar, or you're a service lead generation business. There's just some nuances there, which later versions for digital info products and for lead gen are coming. But this one we're going to share today is primarily intended for e-commerce. And just going through that process and going through where the name for this is actually unit economics, and going through this process of identifying the unit economics based around customers and using historical data from your business where you can make confident estimations as to if you acquire a customer at a certain cost, what does that mean? What's that likely going to mean for you in 3 months' time, 6 months' time, 12 months' time? What is that going to mean for your revenue? But more importantly, what's that actually going to mean for your profitability? So the key to making this work was to really break it out into a sequence. As the sequence to this, it's actually quite simple. First step is, what's your average LTV? How much do they spend on average over a period of time? For this calculator, we've used 12 months. It's likely that you may have customers that buy for you for many years. Great. That means that extra revenue over time, over more than 1 year, that's going to be additional gravy. Okay, so this calculator is 12 months. The next step is to identify your costs of sales. So these are your costs and expenses that are going to move with your sales volume. If you doubled your sales tomorrow, what expenses will also rise based on that? Other expenses, your direct costs, call them OPEX, or we call them cost overheads. And those costs, if your sales double overnight, those are the costs that wouldn't change.
Mm-hmm. All things being equal, depending on a lot of things depend on that.
Yep. Exactly. Mm-hmm. So even identifying those, breaking down those costs of sales, I mean, you've got costs of goods sold, costs of delivery, your shipping costs, you've got costs of transaction fees, pick fees with your third party, your 3PL. But that's for another sheet. This sheet here is going to assume that you've done your calculations and you've identified what your costs of sales are, and your OPEX. That's actually optional. You can include your OPEX so you can see what impact that's going to have on the estimations. Or you can actually leave that blank just to see, okay, what's going to be the impact of acquiring customers. When you go through the sheet, this will be more clear.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's sort of the high level overview of it. And there's a lot of factors here. And we're doing an entire video series on this called the Chalkboard series, which are over on the Tier 11 YouTube. By the time this goes live, there's probably going to be even more on there, which talks about really all of this stuff. And this is something that we've reiterated a number of times because you said something that was super important, is that when we used to start with clients and we'd ask them that question, Like, how much are you willing and able to pay to acquire a customer? Or better yet, in maybe some cases, like, what are you willing and able to pay to acquire a lead that then turns into a customer? So then you need like that conversion metric between leads and actual converting to sales. It's all marketing really is math. At the end of the day, it's not driven by math. Like the things that you do day in and day out inside Ads Manager or the Google MCC isn't math, but it is math. It's based upon math. And the thing that was floored me is like, why are we getting to this point where clients are like, yeah, you guys are doing a great job, but we're going out of business? Or not that ever happened, but it's like, we're not making much profit here, or it's not as profitable as we thought it was going to be. It came back to this question. And we realized this probably about a year and a half ago. And now it's integrated into our process. And I'm not saying like it is the only way, but what we find is that without it, you are flying blind. So that's why it's so important. And so many businesses don't know how to calculate it because they probably don't have a calculator to figure this sort of stuff out. There are some that do. I was on 2 calls just today. Literally, I asked them that question. We were just on a group call and I talked about this. They knew exactly how much they could pay. So they knew like $50, or I can pay $150 for a lead, provided that I have a 3% close rate. Great. Okay, so that averages out to $3,000, $2,500 per sale. Point is like, if they don't know it, that's what today's show is for. Or if you do know it, double check it against the nCAC calculator. But that was the big discovery I think that we all had. It was like the light bulb went over our heads, and John Moran was right in the center of this whole thing. And we're all like, why haven't we been doing this all along? Because every business needs to know it.
And I think that's the key, that for those who have not approached their unit economics in this way to identify a profitable cost per acquiring a new customer, it's a feeling of clarity and confidence that you may have never experienced before in what you're getting from your paid media investment. So as we know, the ad platforms are designed to make us spend more money. They have their own internal reporting metrics, such as ROAS. Again, enough content, we've covered that. But identifying your profitable cost per acquisition will give you that clarity and confidence if you haven't done this before, that, again, you maybe never experienced before.
All right, well, let's stop talking about it. Let's just show it with an actual example. So Nick is going to share his screen here. Like I said before, if you're walking the dog or you're on the treadmill, or you can listen to this on your iPhone or your mobile device, definitely check us out over on the YouTube channel so you can actually see this being done over at perpetualtraffic.com/YouTube. And also the calculator, check it out at tier11.com/nCAC. It's completely free. Nick's put in like 100 hours onto this thing, debating our CFO over like what goes where. And he's got like this, very prestigious British accent. So he has lots to say about everything that we're talking about here.
nCAC calculator.
So he used to work like there. Here's a cool thing, though. He's sort of a pain in the ass when it came to this, quite honestly. I love Adrian, but, he was like, well, there's so many different variables. He used to work at KPMG. Like he's like a CFO nerd of nerds. He does all our acquisitions here. Like he knows this finance stuff inside and out. But we got his blessing, so we know it's not crap. We know we're not making it up. Like we actually have an adult in the room, as opposed to me and you're just like, yeah, just get it out there.
That's the thing. I mean, he's brilliant. He's like, well, if you spend 100K on paid media today, that's not going to be like spending 100K in 2 years' time because of inflation. And maybe you're better off taking a business loan with a balloon payment at this interest level and writing. And like, it's just, it's absolutely brilliant.
And annoying at the same time because we just wanted to get something out. Anyway, we're giving Adrian a lot of crap here, but he deserves it.
And this calculator is intentionally simple. It's functional and it's an effective estimation tool. Yep. There are 4 tabs, which are separated by the 4 steps you need to take. So we're going to go through each of the 4 steps today, each of these tabs, and end up on the most important one, which is the estimations tab, where you are going to be able to see the estimate of the impact on the paid media spend will have on your net profit or net loss if you're acquiring customers at too high cost, and based on the nCAC target that's been identified. So let's go first of all to step one, which is the LTV. How much do customers spend with you? How much of their money do they spend buying your products over time? And we have these 6 cells here where FTOV, this is average first time order value. And then we have the average amount spent by month 3, month 6, month 9, and month 12. Where can you get these numbers from? If you're on Shopify, these are going to be in your customer cohort analysis, where they're going to have the month 0, month 3, month 6, all the way up to month 12. For today's example, we're going to be using the Tier 11 data suite, which is also another source where you can get your LTV numbers if you are set up on the data suite. So this is an actual Tier 11 client where we have our new customer cohort set up here. As you can see, we've got cohorts by month, but the data suite will actually average these out to average customer value at day 0, which is first time order. We have month 3, month 6, month 9, and month 12. So I've taken these and entered these into the LTV values here.
I love that graphic too. So that's the interface of Tier 11 Data Suite. If somebody does not have Tier 11 Data Suite, where do they get that LTV number? And we'll explain like why we're using LTV in just a second here. And for those of you who don't know what it is, it's lifetime value of a customer. But here it's very clear. We see it flattening out in and around month 6 or 7, which is kind of what you're looking for. But like if they don't know that, like, do you know, let's use Shopify as an example. I always say just go in the back end of your Shopify. You should be able to find this, no problem. But it's in there. It's in your CRM. You should be able to figure this out fairly quickly.
Exactly, yeah. And if for whatever reason you're not on Shopify, you're on another platform, as long as you have lists your database of customers and you have their first order date and their last order date, there's ways to crunch this in spreadsheets. It's obviously more involved. Much easier if you're on Shopify or Tier 11 Data Suite, which will do this for you too. Cool. So that's step one.
All right. So LTV, first step. Why do we use? Let's just talk about that. Like, why do you use LTV to start? Like, what's the rationale? Because we're sort of assuming people understand that to begin with. Why is LTV such an important first step in determining?
Because it's the basis for everything else, to have that estimation based on historical patterns with your customers, on average, how much they're going to spend. Okay? Because before you can identify, the revenue from every customer, how much out of that revenue can you spend on paid media? It can't be all of it, because you've got to pay your vendors to buy your products, and you're going to have other costs involved too. So starting with LTV gives us that top line, breaking down the average revenue per customer over time. That's our starting point. Cool. Now, what are we going to do with that revenue and work out how much we can afford to pay for new customers? So that's why we start with LTV, because I found if you start with the costs, the COGS, or you start with the other steps, you've got to go back and get the LTV anyway. So, and we went through this several times. As I mentioned, the original sheet started with the COGS, and it was in all these different sections. And I was like, hang on, this sequence isn't right.
All right. So we start with LTV. Makes a whole lot of sense. For a lot of people, they don't realize, like, I've seen a lot of ways to do this. And a lot of times it does not start with LTV. But from our standpoint, it's like, why wouldn't it? It makes a whole lot of sense. The question is your look back period. So I have a question for you on that. Like, we did a look back period of 12 months on this particular client, but also there at about 6 to 9 months, that LTV starts to flatten out a little bit. Why did you use 12 months here as opposed to either 6 or 9 in this example? Because that's a big question we get. How long should I look back? And I say it always depends, but what's your answer there?
Yeah, and this is where the average order frequency is going to vary and play a big part in this. So some businesses, you may have your customers buy once a year. And in this case, it might look something like this. You might have this might plateau out in month 3, And, that's okay. Right. Some businesses are set up, to not have as much recurring revenue. It just means you have to be profitable on the first time order. You're not going to be able to afford a higher nCAC and rely on that repeat customer business or even acquire customers at a loss. You're going to have to get that first time profitability. So in this case here, now I've just got to go back and check what the numbers were. We had 9,900. Oh, I can just do the undo, so put those back. So in this case here, there's still, this is not a huge amount of repeat customer or order frequency. However, in the later stages, we'll see that this is still very powerful in the way this compounds more over time. So
how it compounds, right? And profit at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Right. So for those of you who are listening who aren't seeing this, it really is like your first time order value is $99. Month 3, it goes up to 104, 107, 116, month 12 at around 122. So there is an escalation over time for LTV, but basically it's in and around like the 120 mark. Now, based upon risk of the client, like a lot of clients will say, well, I want my money back sooner. So I want a lower nCAC so I'm profitable on month 1. Because we actually factor in, there's another way of doing this, which I'm sure you're going to exemplify here in today's show, is factoring in what your desired profit margin is. So just because you're paying, whatever our calculation is, the lower that number is, the better off you're going to be from a profitability standpoint, but also that might limit your scale. So there's always this kind of balancing act. And we'll get into that. But like one of the examples that we used on a show just previously, we'll leave links in the show notes, is that they have customers that stay with them for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And that just compounds their, so where do I stop? Should it be 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? Should it be 3 years? Well, that's a decision that you, the business owner, have to make. I would err on the side of shorter rather than longer, just being a little bit more conservative. But in general, I think a 12 months look back like this, an analysis like this, gives you a pretty good idea of where that LTV kind of levels off. Is that safe to assume?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So we take LTV.
Cool.
And then step number 2, we got that.
And another reason, just to answer why starting with LTV, another way I like to think about this is when you look at the P&L statement, there's always that top line revenue at the top. And you can think about this as like top line LTV. So now we're going to go down through the line items and go into the costs. So going to step 2 is where we're going to enter our costs. And first of all, we have a percentage setting here from direct costs from sales. So these are the costs we talked about earlier, where if we doubled sales tomorrow, these are the costs which would move with that sales volume. The second variable here, the second cell here, these are the direct costs from overheads, which is a numerical value, which is a set amount, which, again, all things being equal, on average, how much does it cost to keep the business running? If sales stopped tomorrow for whatever reason and you had to keep the business running, how much would it cost to payroll, keeping storage, whatever, the offices, everything that, the OPEX to run the business. So for this example, I'm actually going to set this to 0 because then we can come back and see the impact on this on the estimation. So for now, I'm actually just going to set that to 0. With this client, we've identified that their total direct costs on average, their gross margin basically 62%. So their direct cost from cost of sales are 38%. You just flip that around. This is a gotcha that can be quite common, is that I've seen it's quite common to only enter costs of goods sold here and underestimate the other costs involved, such as shipping, cost of transactions, etc., which it's quite common to add another 12 to 15% to the overall costs. So make sure here you're going through and breaking down all those costs associated with when you actually sell a product, when you actually have an order come in, have all of them put into this percentage. So in this case, we're at 38%.
Okay. So COGS, this is what gets your gross profitability. So cost of sales, cost of goods sold, it's all basically the same thing. It's a variable number with volume. The more you sell, the more of this you have. The less you sell, the less. So it's completely elastic with revenue. as opposed to inelastic, which is sort of like OpEx, which always stays the same until a certain point. If you sell too much, then you have to buy a new warehouse and you got to get new leases and all these other. We're going to set that stuff aside. This is what Adrian, our CFO, would always sort of nitpick on. But like COGS can, in your mind, I mean, fulfillment costs, warehousing and storage. That's one of the questions. Like warehousing and storage. Do you include that in your cost of sales in your COGS? Because the more stuff I sell, the more warehouse I actually will need, more warehouse space. All these other sorts of things, like, and then the labor that's involved with doing the pick and pack, and then maybe somebody who's on an assembly line, like their wages, like where do you sort of begin and end, at least in your mind, where it sort of starts to creep into OpEx as opposed to just cost of sales or COGS?
Really, really great question. And that's where, I mean, it's going to vary with each individual business. I would err on the side of, if it's not going to change drastically with sales volume. For example, a new warehouse, that's going to be a one-time event. So that may mean that instead of 40,000 a month, if you've expanded by a great amount, you may be adding an extra 15,000, and that would mean that at some point your OpEx is going to go from 40,000 to say 55,000. But
55,000.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's going to be an extra expense added to those operating expenses. You're making you hire. And this is where it gets really interesting with marketing too, because if you hire an SEO company to, do your SEO, that's usually a fixed monthly retainer, and that's not going to move with more sales volume. And so you'd actually put that particular marketing expense could go in your OpEx because it's more set.
Good.
Yeah. So this is where, these direct costs, it's going to be very much related to more sales. Those costs are going to rise with that and fall if there's less sales. That's where you want to break these apart. But yeah, it's a great question, and it's got to depend on the business. And you may decide, well, email marketing, for example, do we spend more on email marketing if our sales rise? Maybe not. So even email marketing might go in here. Agency fees would likely be here in the OpEx. So yeah, that's my take on that.
So there is some gray area there. For example, we could probably do a whole show on media efficiency ratio or marketing efficiency ratio. A lot of people say media efficiency ratio or marketing efficiency ratio. I look at it like marketing, I will lump in all of my staff into our MER at tier 11. Yeah. Like that's a hardcore way of doing it. But here, it really is a judgment call whether or not you put something into COGS or whether you put it into OpEx. Yeah. I think every accountant would argue on that point one way or the other. Like 3PLs obviously that's a fulfillment cost. All these things, just think about it as it's a variable cost that rises and falls with sales. Just plain and simple. And that's really a good way of looking
exactly.
at it.
Yeah. So that's step 2. You've got your direct cost from cost of sales, and then optional, for now we're leaving this blank, but that's where you can put in your direct costs from overheads. Let's move to step 3, where we're going to get a preliminary nCAC target. And I do want to put this to 0. I wanted to do that before we got here. But now we're getting to our preliminary nCAC target. The only 2 variables we need to enter here are paid media spend. At the moment, this is on average how much this particular client is spending on their paid media. I'm going to leave this at 0 for now. This is actually not where this is going to end up and not where we have this.
Okay, for those of you who are listening, Nick's talking about the third step here, which is paid media spend. He's got $150,000 in monthly spend, which is about average for this client. And then your desired profit margin, you just have a 0. You can enter whatever you want. Any of the blue spaces that are inside the nCAC calculator, which of course you can get at tier11.com/nCAC, are where you would enter your own numbers, where you would actually pull this data from. So
that's right. Yeah.
I have people who are walking their dogs complain about this sometimes, Nick. So I'm explaining it this way, and I will interrupt you occasionally. So anyway, go ahead. You're doing great.
So apologies, those who are walking your dogs. I can relate. I listen to a lot of content while I'm walking my dog and walking my 6-month-old baby, pushing him in the stroller. So I'll attempt to be as descriptive as I can be. All right. So here we have now in this cell here, and you'll notice these 2 cells are the same. This is our max allowable nCAC. If we were to take all of the profit from every new order, if we were to take all of that gross profit and redeploy that only to paid marketing, and that was our cost for acquiring a new customer. In this case, it would be $61 because we're taking the first time order value of $99 and we're taking out this 38% cost of sales, which is going to buying the products and paying for the transaction costs, et cetera, et cetera. And we're not worrying about the overhead costs for now. Now, keeping in mind too that this is based on averages. So some customers are going to spend more for their first order, some are going to spend less, but we're taking historical data and using it, this average as a starting point. The cells over here, this is where it gets super, super interesting. You'll see these numbers at month 0, we're not making any profit. We're not taking any profit.
Gross profit. Just to
exactly, because
this is gross profitability. So it's sales minus cost of goods sold or cost of sales equals gross profit.
We're taking that $61
one of the MPIs
from these new orders, and we're going to be redeploying that into our paid media to acquire more customers. It means we wouldn't take any profit from those first orders, gross profit in month 0. So we're at 0 here at month 1.
It's kind of hardcore.
Yeah, it's pretty hardcore. And there is sometimes a case for this if you have very strong repeat average order frequency. Now, this
100%.
year,
and in highly competitive spaces where you're bidding out a very hefty competitor, we see this happen all the time. They might actually go negative their first month.
Yeah. So here, what we have here is lifetime contribution margin.
Ooh.
In contrast to
so many big terms here, Nick. I love it.
So in contrast to, if you think about that P&L statement, the top line revenue, now we have the lifetime profit contribution on average per customer. And we see here, this still doesn't look like a lot, but on the next page, when we get to estimates, we'll see how this compounds over time. So this is by month 3, that $3, that gross profit that you're getting from a new customer, you don't have to pay for that anymore. There's no paid media spend involved to acquire that customer. So this is where, over time, as we're going to see, this returning customer revenue starts to compound. Now, I just want to pause there. If there's any questions about this particular sheet before we go into the estimates.
Yeah, I think a super important part to this is exactly what you said. You don't have to pay anymore because you've already paid to acquire that customer. This is where the ad platforms might really screw you. Because if you use Advantage Plus and Performance Max, just on those two platforms, obviously on Meta and Google, they're going to go out and find customers who you've already sold to. And we know that to be true no matter what, whether it's Meta, whether it's Google, whether it's TikTok, I don't care what it is. They're always going to include people who have potentially bought from you before and or are familiar with your brand. However, what you really need is you need a tool that teases out those new customers, the ones who have never bought from you before. And sometimes that's a very low percentage. Like we've done tons of Tier 11 lives where John goes through this and it's only 38% or maybe 40% or 20% new customers. He's like, that's okay. I understand because my nCAC is the thing I care about the most. But just keep in mind that if you're using the ad platforms to make these determinations, you might be led astray because you're paying double, triple, quadruple sometimes to acquire the same customer over and over again. And that makes your media very inefficient.
Yeah, there may be a whole other episode on retention strategy and life cycle marketing where...
Absolutely. That's why you're coming back again.
Right. And this is a conversation hot topic right now. My take is paid media is primarily for acquisition. That's where you're going to get your best bang for your buck. And trying to run ads to get the people who've already bought from you to buy more just because of seeing the ads, there's probably better ways to get them to buy more. But anyway, I think that's probably could be a whole other episode. So in this case, as you mentioned, this lifetime contribution margin, this repeat revenue is the customers are coming back and we're allocating our paid media spend to acquisition. So in this case, we haven't baked in any additional profit. So at month 1, we're at 0 profit. I'm now going to go to step 4, breaking even, So I'm now going to go to step 4, where we're going to be able to see what that looks like for profitability and the potential impact on the top line and bottom line for this client. So here we go.
So just to pause there for a second. So you're saying you're breaking even, but in actuality, you're actually at a loss business-wise because you're still paying your OpEx.
Exactly.
Like your OpEx, your salaries, your rent, your management layer, your attorney's fees, like all that stuff that you have to pay out. Like,
exactly right.
You're not actually breaking even.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Hence the reason for step number 4 here. And not to overly simplify it, but yes, you do need to figure out like what is your desired profitability and make it realistic to a certain degree. And then once you know that, then you can work on all the other sorts of things, which will have you back on the show about like how do you increase average order value? How do you increase LTV? There's so many different factors here. We're really just focusing in on cost to acquire that first customer the first time. What can you pay for that? And that's what this calculator is all about.
100%. Yeah.
So,
all right, drum roll. Let's go to our estimate screen. Here we go.
Step
now the
4.
numbers are
Here we
a
go.
little smaller, so I'm going to try and zoom in. But here we go. So we have our max.
Who thought that spreadsheets could be so much fun, Nick Miller?
So we're going to just ignore that. That's for if you want to see what it looks like if you're scaling your paid media spend per month. But we're just going to assume our paid media spend will be flat in this row here, $150K per month. Mm-hmm. And this is what the revenue is going to look like only from these new customers that we're paying for. So that's a key distinction here. But as we can see, for this particular client, it's actually
new revenue. New revenue, not all revenue.
Exactly.
So got it. Or NREV. Do we have an MPI for NREV? No, I don't think we do.
NREV, well, we do track it in our sheets. So we will track NREV, AREV, RREV. We do break that out. But the MPI, which we got to talk to, we have our nCAC, of course, but then when we get to NMER and MER down the bottom here, this is some very cool patterns you can see when you start to look at what happens when you acquire, the acquisition cost is too high, and then when you try to chase MER by reducing spend, and you see this cycle that can happen. But going back to our numbers here, so our new revenue from our new customers who acquired would be this number here. I'm not including any returning revenue, existing returning revenue. So again, this is only from those new customers. But here we have our direct costs from cost of sales and our paid media spend.
Yep.
And our gross profit, as we saw.
So for those of you listening, it's $241,000 in new revenue, thereabouts, $935. And then direct cost of sales is $91,935. Okay. And then your ad spend is $150K. Yep. So at that point, like you are paying to acquire a customer for zero gross profit. Yeah. So you're breaking even gross profitability, even though you're probably at a loss because of your OpEx. Makes sense.
We can see here that month 1, we're at zero net profit based on this investment in acquiring new customers. Month 2, we're starting to see some returning revenue coming in. It's a small number to start with, but then this starts to compound over time on average. So by the time we're getting to month 6, month 7, month 8, if we've been acquiring these customers at $61, you'll see our NMER stays the same. So that's going to stay at 1.6. Yep. But our MER starts to compound over time.
Media efficiency
ratio. And this is the power of when you're acquiring customers at a profitable cost, then this MER starts to compound over time. What can happen when you're only looking at MER and you're not looking at new versus returning revenue is you can start to chase MER by pulling back on ad spend. And your MER goes up, but then you're acquiring less customers. So that can turn into a cycle where over time you're acquiring less customers. And what does that mean? Over time, there's less repeat revenue coming in. Right. So it turns into
this compounding effect, which is really is the beauty of knowing these numbers. And we're looking at zero gross profitability here. And still, you are starting to make profit at that $150K spend. Like it's not significant, but it's like $3,700 month 2 all the way to $34K at month 12, which is very conservative. But keep in mind, we are not factoring in any profit margin at all here. Exactly. So this is a really sort of this is a harsher model, but still you can see the compounding effect of those new customers as they buy more from you over time.
So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back and add in a $30,000 OpEx cost Let's make it 40,000.
Okay.
And now we can see the impact that has on the estimates. And as you can see, if OPEX was at 40K, then acquiring customers at $61 is, in the long term, I mean, yes, that this may be profitable, but it's going to be too much of a length of time to make sense for this business. So this would actually, from that paid media investment, there'd actually be a $277,000 loss, because every month we're going into the hole. Taking into consideration, there is likely going to be existing returning revenue that would push this into net profitability. However, it's still not the ideal scenario. We'd be basically asking the client, okay, if we acquire customers at $61, this is what it's going to look like. Do you have the cash runway? Do you have the reserves to shoulder a $40,000 loss in month one, $36,000 in loss two? Do you have enough repeat customer revenue to cover this? Because it looks like this is not going to be profitable until next year sometime. And they're going to be like, well, no, this is not going to help us grow it the way we want to.
Yeah. So, we don't want to do that.
Right. So here's where we've actually want to bake in 15% upfront into every new customer acquired from that revenue. So this is the ideal scenario, because if you're profitable on first-time acquisition, then you're immediately able to, redeploy that profit into other areas of your business, while still then using that profit to go and acquire more customers. And now when we look at the estimates, we can see here with this OPEX, this is looking much, much better. And this is going to add $361,000 in net profit to their bottom line by the end of the year. And if they keep acquiring customers at maximum $47, because we'll always want to get this as low as possible, but this will allow them to scale profitably. And then the marketing is not going to be the bottleneck to the scale. And this is where confidently is nCAC. Are we acquiring customers at $47? Yes, great. Okay, maybe we can now afford to scale even 5% per month. And now that's just what the net profit estimate looks like by the end of the year.
Which is almost $600,000. If you actually add in your growth rate of 5%, like you're adding more ad spend, you're hitting that nCAC number. You're also factoring in OPEX here.
Yeah.
And then it compounds even more depending on how fast you scale. So you can really start to see these numbers taking off as soon as you sort of put in the different variables in the blue section inside the nCAC calculator here. Let me ask you this question. The 15% that you came to, and this is the question that, because the average e-commerce store is anywhere between 10 and 15%, I believe, based on Shopify statistics. So it's about 12% or so. How did you arrive at 15%? Is this something that you got from the client? Like, how does somebody determine what should I want from a profit standpoint? Because everybody wants like 90% profitability, but it's like, that ain't happening, unless you're...
Exactly. And that's where...
Microsoft Windows, when it first started.
Yeah. You have to look at where has your nCAC, where is it right now? And that's where, for example, you might find your nCAC is much higher than you thought. Say in this case, it was $90. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's a big delta from where it needs to be. Because the beauty of this is you can identify your profitable acquisition target as though you'd never even heard of Meta or Google Ads. This can be done without even opening up the ad platforms. And it's going to be based on what your business needs. So that's where you need to compare at what cost have we been acquiring customers. And that's where going into the analysis like we do here, we look at, okay, are we overspending on Google brand because ROAS looks good? In some cases, we talk to clients who are on Amazon ads, and ROAS in Amazon always looks fantastic. And just as often there is overspend because of that. It's like, we need to spend more on Amazon because the ROAS is so high. So you identify these areas of overspend. We usually see underspend in Meta, because as you scale in paid social and Meta ads, it usually looks worse in platform. Now, with the data suite, you can help to mitigate that with the technology we have to strengthen, the attribution signals. But even then, your attributed nCAC in the data suite may be higher than your target. But as long as your global nCAC is on point, then you're good to scale. And this is where the analysis of the traffic mix and going into what's it look like historically and what does it need to be? And that's the most important thing. What does the business need? And some cases you might find, well, whoa, it may not be possible to only tweak the ads to get the nCAC where it needs to be. What else in the business then can be adjusted? Do you need to increase the AOV? There's different levers to increase LTV, so then you can afford that higher nCAC. But this is a process. And what I love about starting here is it identifies what the target needs to be, and then you're able to see how close you are to that right now.
Right. So one of the questions that we oftentimes will see is you're calculating sort of company or global nCAC here. What if I focused on my most profitable product? Maybe I have a product that is 75% gross profitability or 80%. We've seen clients, used to have a client for years and years, they were basically like 5% COGS on their product. Like $100 product cost them $5 to make it. Like, that's great. That was in the supplement space. The point is that that's kind of rare. The bigger point is, okay, well, your most profitable products, it would stand to reason, especially if they're your best sellers, you want to sell that stuff first as like your first sale instead of looking at global nCAC. So how do you kind of channel that, and how do you sort of decide when you're making the media decisions?
The words right out of my mouth. This is where starting here with a global nCAC is a starting point. Within that global nCAC, when you look at your product portfolio, there are going to be products that are more profitable for you. And when you look at those products, on average, when they are the first product purchased, there's going to be some products which result in more repeat purchases. So this is where you use a portfolio management approach to segment, identify, say, your top 10 to 20% of products. And in a lot of cases, as you mentioned, they're going to be generating most of the revenue. And when you take that approach to your customers, there's going to be your top 10 to 20% of customers who spend more, who buy more, who really are your most valuable customers. And that's more where you want to adjust your marketing message. But for the product portfolios, yes, this is where you want to identify, why is that nCAC profitable? Why is your LTV the way that it is? As you do that analysis, you'll see it's going to make sense to focus more spend on certain products. You can actually duplicate these sheets, this calculator, if you have different product categories that are quite different, that have different customers. Right. So you can actually then do this nCAC targets per category. So this is a starting point. It's a very useful starting point. And some businesses, this will be enough of a starting point to set that as a target and keep going. As long as, we're always watching the products which are the top sellers and we're looking for changes there. We track first-time order value. Mm-hmm. If first-time order value changes significantly, we know that's a signal that, people are buying something different, or if AOV changes in general.
Right.
So this is the tip of the iceberg, but if you get this right, it just has a domino effect of everything else that happens afterwards. And that's, like I was talking about, that confidence and feeling of clarity that may have not been there before can start by doing something like this.
Yeah. No, I think the calculator here is killer, especially, you can vary it based upon your business. Yeah. And once again, you can get this over at tier11.com/nCAC. And there's protected fields in this. If somebody downloads it, a lot of people are like, I don't want to touch any calculator because I'm going to screw it up. Like, no, there's protected fields, and it's pretty clear like how to actually use the whole thing.
I'm just going to do something here, which is quite cool to show. But what this is I've set the additional desired profit margin per new customer to a negative, to minus 20%. So this is where,
interesting,
if this business was acquiring customers at $81, then we could see that they're losing money. They're paying too much. And on every new customer acquired, they're losing money, and not in a way that's profitable because they don't have enough returning volume to make up for that. What I'm also going to do, I'm just going to put in 200,000 returning revenue, existing returning revenue. Okay. So that's what we haven't added until now. But you'll see that the MER here is 2.6. So what can happen is, in order to chase more, we can start reducing ad spend. So I've got minus 10% reducing ad spend. This is pretty extreme, but you can see that more actually starts to increase when you do that. However, we've got less new customer revenue too. So this is this cycle that can be set in place where overall more can be improved by reducing spend. And great, we've got our ad spend efficient again. But it gets hidden so much that that sets in motion this compounding spiral where you've just started to slowly kill your new customer acquisition. And we've seen that. And then we hear, exact words from one of our clients as well. We've never actually looked at new versus returning revenue before. We've just looked at overall more versus ad spend. Yeah.
Overall revenue.
So This is where I forget how I did it, but I was actually able to do this the other day, which showed more increasing, but then starting to decrease as well as ad spend decreased. I forget the exact settings I put in here, but it is a phenomenon that happens. And it's like that short-term hit of more because the returning revenue starts to prop that up. But then that hides the declining new customer acquisition and the declining NMO. Oh, it's like over time, sometimes we have clients coming to us where that's been happening for 3 years and we need to fix this immediately. And then it's like, we can turn this around, but we've got to build back up through acquisition or some other levers. We can't run ads to the people that bought from you 3 months ago and just get them to buy more because we would run ads to them. So super interesting. Really cool.
It's super interesting. What we see a lot too is when a client comes and we do an audit, we see just a lot of retargeting going on. They're just continually cycling through the same clients over and over again, or customers over and over again. And that's usually at like a $10,000 to $30,000 a month ad spend. It's like once you prove yourself past that point and you start to go profitable, we've sort of realized that that's sort of a nice benchmark. But in most cases, most meta ad accounts are just churning through the same people, and the frequency is super high. And that's I can't tell you how many times you've seen
cost per
it.
new view. And this is where the platform metrics like cost per click can mask what's happening with what you just mentioned, because a cost per click, lower cost per click, higher CTR. In general, a media buyer would say, okay, this creative is working well. It's got a higher CTR. It's got a lower CPC. With the data suite, sometimes we've checked some of those creatives and we've seen the cost per new visit is over $10.
Yeah.
The new visit percentage on the account in general is less than 20% sometimes, and
or
decreasing over time. So you think what your conversion rate would have to be, which I love this metric in the new visits to new customer conversion rate. It's just such cool developments happening there. I'll wait till that loads. But imagine the conversion rate you'd have to have if you were paying $10 every time to get a new customer to your site. You think about, on average, a good conversion rate, healthier conversion rate on an e-commerce store is 3%. So you spend 100 doing the maths there, the conversion rate would just have to be astronomical. So, and these are some of the hidden bottlenecks to scale that we uncover. So here we have a pretty healthy ECPNV. We have $1.80 here, which is not bad at all.
Yeah, which is effective cost per new visit, which is a metric, which is another MPI. That's a marketing performance indicator that you get inside Data Suite.
We're paying $1.80 to get a person to visit the site for the very first time ever in history. Great leading indicator because it's new eyeballs on the site. And I just was hoping I could bring up, there you go, not $1 CPC there. So anyway, we're kind of going into the weeds in the data suite, but that's the next step. The first part.
That's the next step.
The first part of what today was all about is starting at the business level. Like you could do this, as mentioned, as though you'd never even heard of Google or Meta ads, and identify what your acquisition cost needs to be. It's just such a powerful way of getting clarity on how to go about scaling profitably.
Well, we will leave all of that for the next time you come on. Hopefully we're going to schedule this out in maybe a couple of weeks, where we can go into, we're using this as a base, our nCAC calculator as a base. Then how do you actually use it to make really data-driven decisions? Everybody says they make data-driven decisions, but they actually don't, because they're using data that's faulty or erroneous. So it's actual data-derived decisions. That's sort of the next phase of this. But the foundational concept here is figure out what you can afford are willing to pay to acquire a customer with a profitability that works for you. And you start there, and you start it over at getting the nCAC calculator at tier11.com/nCAC. So we're going to have you back on and go through this a little bit more, especially how this all integrates into Data Suite and how people can do it without Data Suite too. I think that's super important to be able to look into your Shopify or your CRM and determine a lot of these numbers. We've given you a really high overview here, but at least it's a starting point for you so that you can be on the path to scale. And like we say, these are business metrics that matter to produce growth that actually really scales. And that's the key ingredient here. If you don't have this, then you really are not able to grow as an organization. You can't do it profitably unless you're like completely flying blind. And the nCAC calculator certainly helps with that. So super appreciate you coming on. I know you're a busy guy. You're managing a massive team at Tier 11, and super appreciate you putting all this together. Nick Miller, of course. And we didn't even talk guitar here, barely today. So we'll have to talk about that next time.
Yeah, we
can do a whole episode on that. But, yeah, all the non-guitar people would be like, all right, I'm going over to marketing school, or, I'm listening to Hormozzi's podcast. But anyway, so make sure that you do leave a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you like today's show, we're also on Spotify. Leave a comment over there. All the links that we talked about here today are going to be in the show notes over at perpetualtraffic.com. And if you did listen to the audio version, do you need some visuals? Head on over to our YouTube channel, which is perpetualtraffic.com/YouTube. So thank you so much, Nick Miller, head of all things traffic at Tier 11, for coming on to Perpetual Traffic. And until next show, everyone, see ya.